On December 22, 1999, Korean Air Cargo Flight 8509, a Boeing 747-200F, prepared for its journey from London Stansted Airport, UK, to Milan Malpensa Airport, Italy. The aircraft was carrying tons of freight, scheduled for a routine cargo delivery across Europe. The four-person crew, consisting of Captain Park Sang-kyun, First Officer Yoon Ki-hoon, Flight Engineer Park Hong-kyu, and a relief pilot, went through their pre-flight checks. However, unknown to them, a hidden fault in the aircraft's attitude indicator was about to turn this flight into a deadly disaster. At 6:35 p.m. after receiving takeoff clearance, the four massive engines roared to life, and Flight 8509 began its climb into the night sky. From the outside, everything appeared normal, but inside the cockpit, a deadly miscommunication was unfolding. Within moments of takeoff, the aircraft veered dangerously to the left, its nose tilting at an unnatural angle. The ground proximity warning system, GPWS, screamed warnings, but Captain Park ignored them. The co-pilot desperately tried to intervene, but the captain refused to listen. Less than a minute after takeoff, the aircraft plunged into the ground. At 250 knots, investigators quickly discovered that the primary cause of the crash was miscommunication between the pilots and a critical instrument failure. The left side attitude indicator, which displayed the aircraft's orientation, had been malfunctioning for months. Korean Air Maintenance had previously noted this issue, but instead of fixing the problem, they had disabled the warning system. Captain Park, seated in the left seat, was unknowingly flying with incorrect data. His attitude indicator showed that the aircraft was flying level, but in reality, the plane was rolling dangerously to the left. Meanwhile, First Officer Yoon's attitude indicator, on the right side, was working correctly. He could see the aircraft was banking steeply. He repeatedly tried to warn the captain, urging him to correct the flight path. "Sir, we are banking too much. Level out," Yoon called out, his voice growing urgent. Captain Park ignored him, believing his own instruments. In Korean Air's rigid cockpit culture at the time, junior officers were discouraged from challenging their superiors. Yoon, despite his training, hesitated to take control from the captain, and that delay sealed their fate. Seconds later, the yacht Seven hit the ground in a massive fireball, killing everyone on board. Within hours, UK's Air Accidents Investigation Branch, AAIB teams arrived at the crash site, sifting through the wreckage in a smoldering field near Hatfield Forest. The black boxes were recovered, and the cockpit voice recorder, CVR, revealed the final frantic moments inside the cockpit. Investigators determined the captain's primary attitude indicator was faulty and had been for months. The aircraft was banking at an extreme 40-degree angle before impact. First Officer Yoon had identified the problem but failed to assert his authority. The airline's cockpit culture discouraged questioning the captain, contributing to the disaster. Had the first officer taken control, or the captain acknowledged the warnings, the crash could have been avoided. The investigation exposed serious flaws in Korean Air's safety protocols and cockpit management training. This wasn't just an accident, it was a leadership failure. The crash of Flight 8509 wasn't just a tragedy for the crew, it was a major embarrassment for Korean Air. The airline already had a poor safety record in the 1990s, with multiple crashes and incidents linked to poor training, mismanagement, and hierarchical cockpit culture. After the accident, Korean Air faced a massive international backlash. Some countries even banned their pilots from landing in their airspace, citing safety concerns. The airline was now under global scrutiny, and something had to change. Faced with a crisis, Korean Air brought in foreign aviation experts, including former Delta Airlines and FAA officials, to completely revamp pilot training and safety protocols. The biggest changes? Crew resource management (CRM) training became mandatory. Junior officers were now encouraged to challenge captains if they spotted mistakes. Regular safety audits were introduced to improve flight standards. Korean Air had no choice but to evolve or be permanently banned from international skies. In the years following the crash, Korean Air underwent one of the most dramatic transformations in aviation history. By the mid-2000s, they went from being one of the most dangerous airlines to one of the world's safest. Flight 8509 became a case study in how poor cockpit leadership can be deadly. The lessons from this crash are now taught in flight schools worldwide, emphasizing the importance of communication between pilots, the dangers of blindly trusting faulty instruments, the need for junior officers to challenge unsafe decisions. Today, every modern airline cockpit follows strict CRM training protocols, a direct result of tragedies like Flight 8509. Had Captain Park listened to his co-pilot, this crash never would have happened. One failure, 4 lives lost, an entire airline forced to change. Flight 8509 serves as a warning to pilots everywhere. Communication can mean the difference between life and death. For the families of the 4 crew members lost on Flight 8509, the crash was not just an aviation tragedy. It was a deeply personal loss. In the wake of the accident, grieving relatives sought answers, demanding to know why such a routine cargo flight had ended in disaster. The airline offered financial compensation, but for many, money could not replace the truth. Several families pushed for an independent investigation, hoping to hold Korean Air accountable for their unsafe cockpit culture. At memorial services across South Korea, pilots and crew members paid tribute to their fallen colleagues, with many quietly acknowledging that the crash could have been prevented. For the families, the real question remained: why didn't the captain listen? Experts analyzing the crash pointed to a deep-rooted issue in Korean Air's cockpit culture, one that prioritized hierarchy over safety. Investigators interviewed former Korean Air pilots, who confirmed that questioning a superior officer was often discouraged. Many recalled instances where junior officers had noticed mistakes but remained silent, fearing retaliation or humiliation. The crash of Flight 8509 was a tragic reminder of how dangerous unchecked authority could be. The aviation world realized that human psychology played a critical role in flight safety, and no amount of technical expertise could replace open communication between crew members. While cockpit culture was a major factor, investigators also focused on the aircraft itself. The Boeing 747-200F's attitude indicator had been faulty for months, yet no proper maintenance action had been taken. Engineers and aviation specialists debated whether modern aircraft should rely more on automated safety systems to prevent pilot errors. Could a more advanced warning system have alerted the first officer earlier? The crash added momentum to the push for automation in aviation, leading manufacturers to develop better redundancy systems to prevent reliance on a single instrument. Following Flight 8509, Korean Air implemented drastic changes in its pilot training programs. But the airline was not alone. Other airlines across the world took notice of the tragedy and began enforcing mandatory crew resource management, CRM, training to empower first officers to speak up. More simulator exercises focused on handling instrument failures and emergency scenarios, improved maintenance protocols to ensure that faulty instruments were properly addressed before flights. The lessons from Flight 8509 shaped a new generation of pilots, ensuring that no future cockpit crew would remain silent in the face of danger. More than 2 decades later, Flight 8509 remains one of aviation's most critical case studies in cockpit management failure. Airlines today continuously train pilots to challenge unsafe decisions and speak up without hesitation. Korean Air's transformation from a troubled airline to a model of safety is often cited as one of the greatest turnarounds in aviation history. A journey sparked by the lessons of Flight 8509. Had Captain Park listened that night, 4 lives could have been saved. But from that tragedy emerged a new era of cockpit communication, one where every voice matters. For pilots today, the lesson is clear. Safety is a team effort and silence can be deadly.